Mihailo Tolotos is one of the most fascinating and mysterious figures in modern religious history. According to various stories and reports, he was a Greek Orthodox monk who lived his entire life without ever seeing a single woman. This strange but intriguing fact has led many to label him as the only man in modern history to have lived and died without laying eyes on the opposite sex. But who was this man? And how did he end up living such an isolated and unusual life? Mihailo Tolotos was reportedly born around the year 1856 in Greece. Yet, Mount Athos is not an ordinary place. It is a spiritual sanctuary that has remained almost untouched by modern civilization. His daily life consisted of rising early, attending liturgical services, working in the gardens or libraries, and meditating in solitude. He lived in a world that never changed. The mountains, the stone buildings, the sacred chants, everything remained the same year after year. Time moved slowly and the outside world felt distant and unimportant. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Mount Athos was even more isolated than it is now. Trains, cars, electricity, movies, and airplanes all began to appear. While most people lived surrounded by families, television, the internet, and constant noise, Mihailo lived in peace. His mind was not cluttered with news or gossip. His heart was focused on spiritual matters. Since there are no official monastic or church records mentioning him, and because the story rests mainly on a single newspaper article from 1938, it is possible that his tale is part legend, part truth. The Avaton law, the monastic discipline, and the spiritual isolation of the peninsula are real, and they continue to shape the lives of the monks who live there today. In a world that is more connected than ever, the idea of complete separation from society is both fascinating and frightening. It was not just a retreat from society, it was a lifelong removal from everything that most people consider essential. Yet he may have found peace, joy, and spiritual enlightenment in ways that are difficult for outsiders to understand. Could you imagine never seeing a member of the opposite sex? Never watching a movie? Never hearing modern music or using a phone? For most people, such a life would seem unbearable. But for Mihailo, it was all he ever knew. To this day, women are still not allowed to enter Mount Athos, making it one of the last places on Earth where an entire gender is forbidden by law. Over the years, stories from Mount Athos have taken on a mythical quality. Some do it through careers, family, or relationships. Others do it through travel, adventure, or art. And some, like Mihailo Tolotos, seek meaning by turning away from the world entirely and devoting their lives to God. The idea of a man who never saw a woman is so remarkable that it captures the imagination, whether it is fully accurate or not. To him, the absence of women may not have been strange at all. It was simply part of the world he knew. They believed that he was perhaps the only man who had lived and died without ever seeing a woman. In today's culture, where relationships, gender identity, and social interaction are central themes, Mihailo's life stands as a total contrast. He lived without romance, without family ties, without the experience of love between man and woman. The story forces us to reflect on the diversity of human lives and the many paths that people walk in pursuit of meaning. His death was noted in a small newspaper article from the United States, the Edinburgh Daily Courier in Indiana. This article is one of the only sources of information about Mihailo Tolotos, and it has fueled interest in his story ever since. But for Mihailo, life remained simple. He never saw a car, he never rode a train, he never watched a film, and he certainly never met a woman. Others defend it as a necessary part of the monk's spiritual practice. The Greek government has upheld the Avaton law, citing the religious independence of Mount Athos. International human rights groups have challenged it, but so far the tradition remains intact. Did he ever wonder about the world beyond the mountain? Did he have any curiosity about women, families, or society? These are questions we may never be able to answer, but we can try to imagine what his life might have been like. In many ways, he lived in a different era. He experienced none of the things that most people today consider normal or even essential to daily life. The monks there lived in silence, prayer, and complete separation from the outside world. Many of them never left the peninsula after taking their vows. Very little is known about his early life, and there are no official birth records that have been found. The monks there believe that by removing themselves from the distractions of the world, including women, they can better connect with God. Their lives are centered on prayer, humility, and discipline. In such a setting, Mihailo would have been taught from an early age that worldly desires and attachments were to be avoided. He would have been raised in an atmosphere of silence, scripture, and contemplation. It is a self-governed region that is dedicated entirely to prayer, religious study, and the monastic way of life. It is so sacred to the Orthodox Christian tradition that even the government of Greece recognizes its special status. Women are not allowed to enter the territory of Mount Athos. In fact, the ban is so strict that even female animals, with a few exceptions, are not permitted on the mountain. This law is known as the Orphaned, and it has been in place for over 1,000 years. What makes his story even more mysterious is that he was said to have been orphaned as a baby and brought to Mount Athos by a group of Orthodox monks. Mount Athos, also known as the Holy Mountain, is a remote monastic community in northern Greece that has been home to Eastern Orthodox monks for over 1,000 years. Mount Athos is not like any other place in the world, because Mihailo Tolotos was raised entirely within the walls of Mount Athos. And because of the strict enforcement of the Avaton, it is believed that he never once saw a woman, not even his own mother. If this is true, it means that from the moment he opened his eyes as an infant until the moment he closed them in death, he lived in a world that was completely male. All the monks, all the visitors, all the workers, and even the animals around him were male. The idea of someone living for more than 80 years without ever seeing a woman sounds almost impossible in today's world. According to reports, Mihailo Tolotos became a monk himself and lived a quiet and devout life. He prayed, worked, and followed the routines of monastic discipline. As the decades passed, the modern world began to develop. When Mihailo Tolotos died in 1938, the monks of Mount Athos are said to have honored him with a special burial. The story of Mihailo Tolotos raises many questions. How could someone live such a life? Was he truly happy? Mount Athos is a place of deep spiritual focus. This environment likely shaped his mind and spirit in powerful ways. Yet from the outside, his life appears incredibly unusual. Some people question whether Mihailo Tolotos ever truly existed. Still, even if the story is exaggerated, it draws attention to the unique and timeless traditions of Mount Athos. This tradition has led to debate in modern times. Some people argue that the ban on women is outdated and discriminatory. Mihailo Tolotos' story also brings attention to the power of isolation. Many spiritual traditions around the world include periods of isolation, fasting, and silence. But Mihailo's life represents the extreme version of that path. As we reflect on his story, we are reminded of the many different ways that human beings seek meaning. Then, though Mihailo Tolotos may have lived an isolated life, he was not alone in his journey. Monks on Mount Athos live in close brotherhood, eat together, pray together, and support one another spiritually. Their days begin with long liturgical services that can last for hours. They chant ancient prayers in Greek, often by candlelight, in the same way that their ancestors did hundreds of years ago. Meals are simple and usually vegetarian, eaten in silence while scripture is read aloud. Each monk has specific tasks. Some tend to the gardens, others copy religious texts, bake bread, or maintain the monastery buildings. If this is true, it means that he had no curiosity or longing for something he had never known. This is very different from someone who chooses to avoid women or chooses celibacy. Mihailo's experience was total. He was born into a world where the concept of woman simply did not exist around him. This article, printed in the Edinburgh Daily Courier of Indiana, USA, claims that the monks gave Tolotos a special burial in honor of his unique life. But the lack of church records or other sources has led many to believe that the story may be partly myth. Most people's understanding of the world is shaped by their interactions with both men and women. From birth, we are taught about family, love, relationships, and social roles. But for Mihailo, none of that existed. His world had no female figures, no romantic stories, no mothers, daughters, or sisters. It was a world defined by male spiritual connection, scripture, and silence. Still, Mount Athos has long been a place of mystery, and legends often grow in such soil. Even the most isolated communities are touched by modern technology. Children are exposed to media from a young age. Travel and communication are faster than ever before. But Mihailo lived in a time and place where true isolation was still possible. His life reminds us of how different the world was just a century ago, how much has changed. It's as though he lived in a parallel universe, one shaped entirely by male community, faith, and spiritual devotion. For the monks of Mount Athos, living a life free of temptation and distraction is a spiritual goal. What do we take for granted? What experiences shape us the most? Can a person live a full life without knowing love, romance, or family? Mihailo's life may have been silent and hidden, but it speaks volumes about the diversity of human experience. By removing women from the monastery, I believe they are better able to focus on God. Mihailo's life, whether real or legendary, represents the extreme form of this ideal. He was not just a monk who avoided sin, he was a man who had never been touched by the world at all. This deep bond of faith and community creates a kind of family, even though monks take vows of celibacy and solitude. It's difficult to say. Monastic life is not about personal pleasure or worldly satisfaction. It is about surrender, service, and spiritual struggle. Orthodox monks do not seek happiness in the usual sense. They seek closeness with God. For Mihailo, the absence of women was not something to be missed. His focus was always in word and prayer, meditation, and the teachings of the church. For Mihailo, his brothers were his only companions, and his world was built entirely around prayer, discipline, and silence. Others see it as a curious footnote in history, a man who lived in total gender separation. Whatever the truth may be, his story has captured the imagination of people around the world. Perhaps there was a monk who lived most of his life in isolation. Perhaps he saw a woman as a baby, but remembered nothing. Or maybe his story became a symbol within the monastery, an example of someone who lived the ideal of spiritual detachment. In any case, the legend remains powerful and continues to be retold today. It challenges our assumptions about human connection, gender roles, and what it means to live a complete life. Airplanes filled the sky. Radios brought music and news into people's homes. Cities grew larger. Women entered the workforce and began demanding equal rights. Most people live their lives in a constant flood of information, technology, and human interaction. But there is something powerful in the simplicity of the monastic life. The absence of distraction can lead to a deeper awareness of the present moment. Silence can become a source of peace. And for someone like Mihailo, who never experienced modern stress, his mind may have been clear in ways that are hard for us to understand. But on Mount Athos, life was still rooted in the rhythms of the ancient church. For Mihailo, none of the changes in the outside world touched his life. He never flew in a plane, never listened to a radio, and never saw a woman. His world remained completely untouched. The routines of Mount Athos are strict. Monks rise very early, often before sunrise. Mihailo Tolotos would have participated in all these activities. Over the decades, he probably memorized entire books of scripture. He would have learned the lives of the saints, the ancient hymns, and the rules of Orthodox monastic life. In a world of constant change, he lived in a place that stayed the same. Each season brought quiet beauty, snow in winter, flowers in spring, but the structure of life remained untouched by time. As the 20th century moved forward, the world around Mount Athos changed rapidly. This kind of extreme isolation may seem shocking today. It is said that Tolotos never once asked about women. Many people who hear his story wonder, was he truly happy? Even though there is little official documentation about him, the legend of Mihailo Tolotos lives on. Some view his story as a symbol of pure monastic discipline. Modern historians have tried to verify his story, but have found little evidence beyond a single newspaper article from 1938. Some argue that the story may be true, but slightly exaggerated. The story also raises interesting questions about gender, identity, and what it means to be human. Could someone in today's world live such a life? It would be nearly impossible. Mihailo Tolotos' story also offers a glimpse into the power of belief. And yet, for all its strangeness, there is something deeply human about his story. It makes us reflect on the lives we live. Life on Mount Athos is unlike anywhere else in the world. The mountain is dotted with 20 major monasteries, along with dozens of smaller hermitages and cells. While the outside world was dealing with wars, revolutions, and new inventions, Mihailo's life remained the same. He rose before dawn, walked in the same stone halls, prayed in the same candlelit church, and sat in the same garden watching the trees move in the wind. The passing of time was marked not by calendars, but by liturgical seasons and ancient chants. Each monastery has its own traditions, but all follow the same orthodox principles. The monks live without luxury. In most cultures, relationships between men and women are central to family life, community, and personal growth. But Mihailo's life followed a different pattern. His experience, wisdom, and dedication would have made him a source of guidance for younger monks. He may have mentored others, helped teach scripture, or led prayers. This strange fact has led some historians to doubt the accuracy of the story. A true story is told and retold, with each version adding new details. Others criticize it as an unnatural denial of basic human experience. Every few years, someone raises the issue in the European Parliament or files a complaint with human rights organizations. But Mount Athos remains unchanged. Its ancient rules are protected by both church and state. The monks live as they always have, far from the noise of politics and modern debate. Feminists argue that the Avaton law is unfair and exclusionary. In his silence, we hear a message about faith. In his stillness, we see a reflection of inner peace. And in his total separation from the world, we are reminded of how deeply connected most of us are to each other, to society, and to the world around us. Not every great story involves battles, inventions, or political power. Sometimes the most powerful stories are quiet, happen in silence, in prayer, and in the long shadows of ancient buildings. His story is a reminder that not all lives are lived the same way, and not all paths lead to the same kind of meaning. They point out that no other place in Europe legally bans women by gender. Human rights groups have petitioned to open Mount Athos to all, but the monks remain firm. Whether he lived for 82 years without ever seeing a woman or not, his story touches something deep in us. It speaks to the human longing for purpose, for discipline, for something greater than ourselves. His life may seem strange, but it also holds a kind of purity that is rare in the modern world. They believe that the law is not about discrimination, but about preserving a sacred tradition. Over time, the man becomes a symbol. Mihailo Tolotos may have been one monk among many, but his story has become a mirror that reflects the mystery of Mount Athos itself, a place outside of time, a life outside of modern experience, a soul devoted entirely to faith. Only a limited number are allowed in each day. Those who go say that it is like stepping back in time. There are no cars, no shops, no loud music. Just mountains, stone monasteries, the sound of bells, and the scent of incense. The monks live much as they did 1,000 years ago. It is a world built on prayer, silence, and sacred tradition. Why was such an important event not recorded in Greek church records? Why is the only evidence a foreign news clipping? These questions remain unanswered. Some believe the story was invented or exaggerated to amaze readers. Others think it may be based on a real person, but with details added over time. Though his name does not appear in any official records, his presence may have been deeply felt within his community. Even in a place of silence, some voices are remembered. His relationships were with his fellow monks, with God, and with the natural beauty of the mountain. He did not know love in the romantic sense, but he may have known deep spiritual love that transcends human desires. They sleep on hard beds, wear simple robes, and eat modest meals. It is one of the strictest gender restrictions in the world. According to the newspaper article that told his story, the monks of Mount Athos held a special funeral for him. They believed that he was the only man in history to have lived and died without ever seeing a woman. They saw his life as an example of complete spiritual purity. Whether or not every detail of the story is true, it reflects the deep reverence the monks felt for someone who had lived so far removed from the world. The law is enforced by both the monastic community and the Greek government. Even female animals, like cows and chickens, are banned except for cats, which are needed to keep mice away. This law is not based on hatred or fear of women. Instead, it comes from the monks' belief that their vows require total spiritual focus, without emotional or physical temptation. Their days are divided between prayer, work, and study. This is the world where Mihailo Tolotos spent his entire life. He never left the mountain, never saw a car drive past, never heard a radio broadcast, never watched a movie. The monks of Mount Athos believe that the outside world is filled with distractions. Their goal is to empty themselves of worldly concerns so that they can focus entirely on God. They take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. He never felt it as a restriction, because he had no memory of anything else. Unlike the other monks who had once lived in the world and chosen to leave it, Mihailo never had a choice. He was born on the mountain, raised by monks, and lived every day in the same sacred space. To him, this was not isolation, it was home. For them, every moment of silence is a chance to listen to the divine. Every fast is a way to purify the soul. Every act of humility is a way to defeat pride. In such a world, the absence of women is not just a rule, it is part of their sacred way of life. The Avaton law, which bans women from Mount Athos, has existed for over 1,000 years. For Mihailo Tolotos, this law shaped his entire reality. He never questioned it. The concept of a man who lived and died without seeing a woman is difficult for many people to understand. As he aged, Mihailo probably became a respected elder among the monks. When Mihailo Tolotos died in 1938, it marked the end of a life that was both simple and extraordinary. The article that reported his death appeared not in Greece, but in a small newspaper in Indiana. USA legends often begin this way. Outside Mount Athos, his story has caused debate. Some people admire it as a powerful example of religious dedication. The debate continues today. Mihailo Tolotos' story reminds us that history is full of unexpected lives. Today, Mount Athos still receives pilgrims from around the world, but only men. Visitors must apply for a special permit. In this world, Mihailo Tolotos found his home. Even if we don't follow the same path, there is something to learn from Mihailo. As the legend of Mihailo Tolotos continues to spread across the internet, documentaries, and books, people from many walks of life reflect on the deeper meaning behind his story. In a world where nearly everyone is connected through technology, the life of a man who had no contact with half the human population is almost impossible to imagine. And yet, his tale challenges us to consider the value of silence, solitude, and devotion in a society obsessed with connection and stimulation. Religious scholars have offered varying perspectives on Mihailo's life. Some Orthodox theologians see him as the ultimate example of asceticism, a life stripped of all worldly pleasures and distractions, a spiritual growth that rises from detachment, a quiet strength built not on relationships with others, but on a relationship with God. His life was not the result of accident or chance, but of a deeply rooted belief system that values spiritual purity above all else. What are we willing to give up in pursuit of our goals or beliefs? He was unknown, unseen by the world, and uninterested in being noticed. His life was lived in the shadow of ancient walls, under candlelight, in the pages of sacred texts. For people outside the monastic world, it is a reminder of how diverse the human experience can be. In the modern world, solitude is often avoided. People fear loneliness. Silence is often filled with noise. But solitude can also be healing. It has survived empires, wars, and revolutions. While the rest of the world changes, Mount Athos remains still. Mihailo Tolotos was part of that stillness. Single life lived quietly, but now echoing across generations. It can provide space to think, to reflect, and to listen, not just to others, but to oneself and to something higher. Whether you see him as a historical figure or a spiritual symbol, his story offers a rare and powerful look into the human soul. In a time where noise surrounds us, perhaps his life is a gentle reminder to listen to the silence, to honor tradition, and to explore the sacred in the most unexpected places. Mihailo's life was not one of loneliness, but of intentional solitude. A solitude chosen not as an escape, but as a calling. In a time where diversity is often discussed in terms of gender, race, or culture, Mihailo's story shows another kind of diversity, the diversity of thought, belief, and life choices. Yet now, decades after his death, the world is still talking about him. Not all journeys need to be long to be deep. Some souls are drawn to silence. Some hearts are called away from the world so they can better hear what is eternal. Mihailo answered that call. In doing so, he left behind a story that will not be forgotten. In his total withdrawal, he has found a kind of immortality. Could we live without television, phones, or social media? Could we live without romantic love or family? Most people would say no. But Mihailo's story shows us that for some, a different kind of life is not only possible, it is meaningful. For most of us, the answer would be no. But for Mihailo Tolotos, the answer was yes. And not just yes, it was a full, committed, and sacred yes. It was this belief that kept him on Mount Athos. It was this belief that justified the Avadan law, where giving up comfort, companionship, and even basic human experience was not seen as a loss, but as a sacrifice for something greater. That kind of sacrifice may seem extreme today, but it holds a truth that still resonates. That sometimes, by giving up the world, we gain something deeper within ourselves. And it was this belief that guided him through more than 80 years of prayer, discipline, and solitude. This kind of path is hard to understand for those outside the monastic tradition. But for the monks, it is a way of life that brings peace, order, and divine closeness. Psychology experts suggest that long-term separation from society, especially without exposure to the opposite sex, may result in emotional stunting or underdeveloped social understanding. They point out that human connection, both male and female, is essential to most people's emotional growth. However, these experts also acknowledge that monastic communities offer their own form of human bonding, built on shared purpose, daily rituals, and deep brotherhood. In Eastern Orthodox tradition, ascetics are deeply respected for their willingness to surrender comfort for spiritual enlightenment. Why did only one newspaper record his story? Could someone have invented it to illustrate a point about faith or discipline? These questions remain unanswered. But like many great stories, the power of Mihailo's tale lies not in whether it is fully factual, but in what it symbolizes. In this light, Mihailo is not a tragic figure, but a sacred one, someone who lived close to the divine by abandoning all that tied him to the material world. Other scholars, however, view the story differently. They caution against glorifying isolation to such an extreme degree. In many ways, Mihailo's life pushes the limits of what we believe is possible. It forces us to reflect on the role of gender in shaping identity. If someone never sees or interacts with the opposite sex, do they still develop a sense of who they are in the same way? Mihailo never had a motherly figure. He never saw a female child, never witnessed a couple in love, never watched a family form. For most people, these experiences formed the foundation of empathy and personal development. Yet perhaps the monks of Mount Athos, including Mihailo, experienced a different kind of growth. Mihailo Tolotos' story is also a symbol of how strong beliefs can shape every aspect of a person's life. Even though we know very little about his personal thoughts, Mihailo's story invites us to reflect on our own lives. What do we value? In modern times, we often associate success with visibility, fame, followers, recognition, but Mihailo's life was the opposite. There is also an element of mystery in his tale that keeps people curious. Was Mihailo real, or is he a legend? For the monks of Mount Athos, the story is a reminder of the sacredness of their traditions. His story also invites us to reflect on the nature of solitude. Mount Athos itself is a symbol of that calling. The mountain stands as a witness to centuries of devotion. In the end, whether Mihailo Tolotos was real or legendary, his story reminds us that not all lives need to be loud to be meaningful. For modern viewers of this video, you might ask yourself, could you live without seeing the world as it is? Without experiencing the things that most take for granted? His life was not an accident of history. It was a reflection of a world where devotion still meant everything. Thank you for joining us on this deep journey into the life of Mihailo Tolotos.